Rachel C. Boyle is the head of interdisciplinary studies in the Carnegie School of Education at Leeds Beckett University. Rachel's research focuses on race, racism, ethnicity, and education. She uses critical race theory as a theoretical framework to examine race inequalities in society, specifically in education. She's worked with trainee teachers to examine the impact of race, racism, and ethnicity on the educational experiences of children and young people. And she encourages her students to develop an understanding of the position of the other and to use their voices to ensure that the teaching profession consistently evolves to meet the needs of the children it serves. More recently, Rachel has worked across the media to provide commentary on societal issues of racism, including the death of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement, and racism within the UK. Rachel, thank you so much. Over to you.
Thanks, Dom, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time. Thanks in advance to Will, who's going to help me out with my slides this morning. I'm a former primary school teacher, now working in higher education. I'm also a mixed race woman, and it's important for me to identify those particular sets of my identity because they indeed inform the research that I do. My research is driven by a desire for racial and social justice, but my passion in this area is underpinned by my experience of education as a child of mixed race, then as a teacher, then a university academic, and more recently as a senior leader in education. Indeed, my racialised position has informed each stage of my life. So if I could have my next slide, please. I'm going to begin with the definition of children's agency that comes from Yana and Dom's work from their blog earlier this year, because it's really important for me to situate this research within this position of children's agency. And if we can summarise children's agency as a socially situated capacity to act, we cannot ignore how the sense of self sits within this. We therefore cannot ignore how race can impact on a child's socially situated capacity to act. And that's a really powerful place for us to begin this morning. Next slide, please. Now, in recent years, we've seen some research around children of colour and their experiences in education, indeed a growing body of research. But I wanted to focus specifically on the educational experiences of mixed race children, as there's slightly less written here. I feel that this will develop over the next few years, but I think we are at an important point in the journey towards racial equality within education. So I'm going to begin with the definition of mixed race in terms of this research itself. And I define a mixed race person or child as somebody whose parents do not come from the same ethnic group. Now, there are hundreds of thousands of different facets within mixed race, but it's really important for us to start there. Now, the school census shows us that 5.5% of our school population are mixed race children. And indeed, between 2003 and 2017, the community of mixed race children grew by 130%. And this tells us that this is the fastest growing community in the country. And it's predicted by 2070 that the mixed race community will be the largest next to those who identify as white. More and more research is being done on this in terms of statistics, but we must be really clear that when we talk about mixed race, this is not one homogenous group. If we look at the achievement of mixed race children as a homogenous group in education, it shows us that they are performing at the national average. And on the face of it, this looks like really good news. Unfortunately, if we drill down and we begin to separate into categories, the picture is not so bright. Indeed, white and Caribbean boys are amongst the lowest performing group in the country. Now, between the ages of 4 and 14, there is a decline in the achievement of mixed race children from white and black Caribbean backgrounds. But if we just simply view them as mixed race, we're carried along on the wave of the success of the homogenous group. And that's not a place where we need to begin with. Next slide, please. Now, if agency is underpinned by a sense of self, we need to be aware and indeed confront where this development of sense of self comes from. So previous research has shown that children develop a sense of self by the people that they interact with, their peers, and indeed their family. But they are also impacted by what they see of themselves in the mainstream media. We also see that on social media increasingly in recent years. We often see sexist and racist images of both white working class women and also Black men as promiscuous. Black men are also regularly portrayed as feckless baby fathers, and the terminology that is used around the position of mixed race people can often be a deficit. So we have terminology that is outdated, such as half caste, quarter caste, coloured, mixed breed. Now we see these terms being bandied about on a daily basis, and indeed these are labelled as old generational patterns. However, they're still prevalent in today's society. So children begin to develop their sense of self, and it becomes a deficit. My research in its early stages has shown that the children view themselves as not complete because of this mathematical aspect to half caste, and obviously the connotations of the word caste from Indian culture. Children believe that they're not complete. So they begin their experiences with the world from a deficit position. Next slide, please. Now, a key theme to emerge from the early stages of my research is that the notion of belonging is central to the development of children's sense of self and indeed their agency. Now, we know children look at their teachers and hold teachers in the highest of respect in most cases. Now, again, government statistics show us that 85.7% of all teachers in the UK are from a white British background. 92.7% of head teachers are from a white British background, and this is compared with only 0.9% of head teachers who identify as mixed race. Therefore, our pupils from minority ethnic backgrounds do not see themselves represented or indeed reflected within their teachers. And this can cause issues around aspirations and also how children view themselves within the curriculum. We also see in previous research that teachers in some cases have inaccurate perceptions of the home life of mixed race children. Again, referring back to those stereotypes that we saw in the mixed race media, this can also come through in the perceptions of teachers. Indeed, my research from 2018 showed this quite clearly. The children are often viewed as mixed race children, particularly those with Black heritage, as simply Black children. This then renders part of their identity as invisible. And invisibility is something that came through from the conversations that I've had with children over recent years. They don't see themselves reflected. They don't recognise other people. They also do not see how the teachers acknowledge their racialized position. Now, this came through in several different ways. Next slide, please. As we know at school, interactions are not always with other people. Indeed, we interact with our curriculum on a daily basis. Children can be empowered by their interactions with the curriculum. But we've seen barriers to aspirations for mixed race children with the curriculum. And pieces of research done before I undertook mine identified that a barrier to raising mixed race pupils' achievement is a failure of the national curriculum to adequately reflect the needs of a diverse and multi-ethnic society. Research from 2018 by Dunn et al. Identified that there's been a silencing of race across the curriculum. We also found, looking at the work of Katie Shan and also statistics from the DFE, that race and ethnicity is not an area that's compulsory or indeed formally taught to student teachers in England. There are huge variations on how this is approached at higher education institutions, and in some parts of the country, Race and ethnicity is indeed embedded within the curriculum. In other universities, students receive maybe an hour a year in terms of lectures and input. And this is a real issue for how we develop teachers' understanding of belonging within the curriculum. We also need to focus on how the curriculum reflects the experiences of our mixed race children. Next slide, please. To return to the notion of invisibility mentioned earlier, I wanted to talk to children about how we counteract this issue in terms of improving it moving forward. And one of the most powerful statements was from a child who said to me, "I'd love it if one of my teachers looked like me." Indeed, again, the reflection of ourselves in our teachers. And this made me reflect on my journey into teaching as a mixed race woman. But I also began to talk to mixed race students. Now, I'm head of subject at Leeds Beckett University, and the department that I run, as Don mentioned, is interdisciplinary studies. So we have a raft of educational programs that involve education, but they do not result in qualified teacher status. So a lot of our students will engage with our degrees. Some may go on to do PGCEs, and I wanted to talk to our mixed race students who chose not to go on to PGCEs and indeed explore their reasons why. Now, currently, there are 1.2% of teachers in the UK who identify as mixed race. Now, as we can see, there's a huge disparity there between where the mixed race community is going. And my conversations with students have been incredibly powerful in identifying the reasons why they wouldn't engage with teaching as a profession. Again, a key theme was around belonging, and do they see themselves in schools, their experience on their placements. Indeed, they complete placements on our programs, but they didn't see themselves in the teaching bodies of the schools that they'd engaged with. They also reflected on experiences as children, racist incidents, for example, things that essentially put them off. I also identified the theme of career prospects and trajectories from this research. And again, this is still in the very early stages, but mixed race students did not see their career trajectory being a positive one if they then reflected on the figures around representation in the teaching profession. And this all leads to quite a negative picture. If we are to indeed empower our mixed race children and enhance their agency, these are the issues that we need to confront within teacher education and schools of education around the country. Next slide, please. So thinking ahead to how we can begin to counteract this narrative and indeed enhance the agency of our mixed race children. The first thing that needs to happen is recruitment of more mixed race teachers to the profession. And this will come from that sense of belonging that students or indeed young people or our mature students will get when they engage with schools and universities. So it's up to us to embed anti-racist practices in the work that we do on a daily basis. We need to take a long, hard look at the messages that our curriculums signify. We also need to take a long, hard look at what we are communicating through imagery, through our branding, and also through our staff. This is a huge task. It's a huge mountain to climb, but we are at a pivotal moment in the discussions around race and ethnicity, particularly around the position of mixed race children. Fundamental British values provide us with an excellent opportunity to immerse schools in anti-racist practice. I've been very critical of fundamental British values over recent history. However, this is an optimum opportunity for us to communicate that to be British is to be diverse. We also need, as educationalists, to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. The issue of race and ethnicity is one that involves a lot of being uncomfortable. And I just want to finish with some final thoughts. If I could have the last slide, please. If we are to empower our mixed race children and ultimately enhance their agency, we must closely monitor our assumptions, our language, and the messages we send through our teaching and learning environments. And as mixed race children and people, we are not half, we are indeed both. And in this, there is strength. We are not mixed, we are all. And in this, there is understanding. Thank you.
And thank you very much indeed, Rachel. I think, it seems to me that you're at the cutting edge of new thinking around, your themes that you presented today. And given there's apparently so little research in those areas, I'm really looking forward to, collaborating with you over the years. One of the other things that struck me was your unfinished criticism of presumably England's national curriculum. And I really do think that's an area that needs a lot of work. It's effectively a radical departure. In my view, it was a radical departure from at least 30 years of curriculum development in England, and I mean national curriculum development. So at the very least, like it or loathe it, it's overdue for some proper evaluation. Now, some of the projects in the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Pedagogy are in advanced stages and will be reporting in various ways. And before I move to the questions, which I must, and there are plenty, I want to just throw in the phrase standard English. And if you look, see, for me, fundamental problem is the way standard English is defined in England's national curriculum. And given that language is inseparable from identity, if we don't get language at it, it really needs to be informed by the best possible linguistics, for example. That's just the starting point. And then, of course, you've got the really hard work to take teachers with you to basically help frankly improve all children's lives, but particularly the children you've identified today. So thank you very much indeed. Let me now turn to some questions. I'm going to start with Diane Boyd, and this is about decolonialising the curriculum. And it reminds me of the British Educational Research Association had a special issue of its Research Intelligence magazine all on this very topic. So it's one that's in my mind. But anyway, so how would you link this to decolonizing the curriculum in early childhood?
I think this is a really, really key point. I'm very lucky working at Leeds Beckett. We have the Centre for Race, Education and Decoloniality, and we're working across the country at the moment with schools around analysing their curriculum and also the messages that the curriculum sends. I think the decolonisation of the curriculum as a whole is something that we need to look at as a country, but I think schools need to take individual responsibility for this. I think we need to analyse what has worked in the past, because there came a point around 2010 where we got rid of some very effective practices in schools. It was no longer a priority for the government. Indeed, they removed race from a number of key documents. It was removed from the teachers' standards, for example, when we then saw those updated in 2012. So schools, as we know, have the power to shape their curriculum. The national curriculum dictates what we must do, but we as individual teachers and schools have the power to shape the curriculum. And one of the questions that I'm regularly asked is around all white schools who have no children from minority ethnic backgrounds. And well, we don't have a problem with racism in our school. What should we do? And it's an interesting question, because the curriculum must prepare the children to live in the wider world. Britain is a diverse society, indeed has been a diverse society for centuries. And we don't like to confront that over here in the UK, but I think it's time that all schools, regardless, decolonise the curriculum to prepare the children for what's going on in the wider world. I hope that answers the question in some way. I'm trying to keep it brief.
Yeah, that's brilliant. You've taken me back to our shared roots in Liverpool, and I was thinking of my ex-colleague who's retired, but he wrote the book Teaching Racism or Tackling It, and it was a study of two teacher training institutions, and he pulled no punches. Anyway.
Very, very powerful text by Russell Jones. I'd recommend for delegates today.
Yes, and thank you for remembering to mention his name. Right, I think we've got one more question for you, and then we're going to move into the panelists. We'll all come back together in a moment and we'll answer some more questions. But Here's a question from Howla Al-Sada. Now, it's about children's literature, so I'm not sure to what extent you'd have that in your expertise, but it reminds me, though, of the Centre for Language in Primary Education in London. We collaborate with them, and we have, a board member, and they've done some wonderful work around picture books and the way different groups in society are represented. Anyway, the question from Howler is, how does the concept of agency, or how is the concept of agency associated with children and race in children's literature? So she's bringing a few things together.
It's a really interesting question. Thank you for that one. Children's literature is something that we've paid attention to in the last couple of years around the figures with regards to the characters in children's books. Children from minority ethnic backgrounds, again, did not see themselves reflected in characters. We then did the analysis of publication and also authors and their engagement with children from non-white backgrounds. And I think that is a really powerful space. Again, referring to the work that we do at Leeds Beckett, we have the Story Makers Press. And within Story Makers, we work with children to construct stories that reflect themselves as characters. Some of the work that's been produced there has been unbelievable. I think to normalise non-white characters in books is central to this. So schools, again, need to analyse the text that they're using. They need to look at latest publications, because there has been a significant push to reflect our children within our storybooks. But I think we all individually need to take responsibility for this. What are we reading? What are we developing? And how can we embed children's literature in a way that normalises diversity within our work on a daily basis? Again, I'm conscious of time, Dom.
Yeah, sure. Well, no, and it reminds me also of the challenges around, for example, the employment of actors and the way that, of course, narratives define in various ways their characters and with particular characteristics. And what happens when you say, well, that may be, but we have to legally employ people, and so on. So anyway, that's fascinating. Can I ask all the keynote speakers then to turn on their cameras and microphones?